So this is Team Avengers. We're working on the Arcos application for the mobile application that's gonna let the patients record data, being able to view the graphs and whatnot. So in our previous iteration, what we worked on was setting up the code repository, the Jenkins, the test, um, as well as all of the pages that we had. That's what we worked on. Hopefully one of our guys will be showing the demos and the mockups that we had created. And after that, we presented that last week, and we also showed the demo over to our sponsors. Now what we have so far is some of the feedback from the sponsor itself. We had a couple of back and forth with the sponsor on some of our pages that we had that we're going to also talk about in this. Apart from that, and last but not least, what are the next iteration task items that we have. So without further ado, what I would first let to go over our prototypes and the changes that we've made since.
Yeah. So just before I talk, so we had a discussion with Venkat about the way our UI looks, because our sponsor wanted it to be a long form style. Wait, go to the emulator. Yeah, so right now, when we create a patient, we haven't actually implemented the way the UI looks yet of what Venkat was recommending to us. But right now, we just have for the initial patient form, it's a long form for them to input their data, right? And so Venkat was telling us that it's not that good of an idea for the user experience to have something so long for them to have to scroll. They don't know when they're going to reach the end, or you know what I mean? Because and this page would go on for quite a while. And so we had come up with 2 solutions to address that. And so An's going to talk about those solutions.
Proposed solutions.
And actually on the screen is the original law form that we had in the first iteration. And after the advice of Professor Venkat, we come up with 2 new versions for the form. Yeah, and this is the first version that we have. So the general idea is breaking down the long form into smaller steps so the user can complete one step at a time and having a feeling of accomplishing something and have the motivation to complete the next step. So in the first option, we have broken the long form into smaller category. As you see here, on the 5 category is listed on the screen, and the screen is very short. And if the user want to fill out a category, they just can click on a category and it would open a drop down with the content field of that category. And if they want to close it, they just need to click on the category again. And this is the second option that we have. Yeah. And for this one, we didn't use an accordion, but instead we use a small icon navigation at the bottom of the page, so the user can easily switch between category. For example, for now, we have the first category, which is patient general info. And if the user click on the second icon, yeah, and it will open up the second category, and they can switch back and forth very quickly. Oh, sorry.
Scroll down first. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. So the strong point of this option is it is very handy. I mean, the icon navigation is very handy for the user because they can very easily switch between all the category. And the weak point of this option may be that it would be a little bit difficult for the first time user to get the flow of the form. But I think if they get it after the first time, the second time, and third time would be a lot easier. For the other option that we have, the strong point is we have everything listed in one page, and it is also handy for the user to switch between category and actually this option is more intuitive for the user because it almost explains itself. So if the user go to the form page, they don't have to think and they just naturally come to the first category, click on it, fill out on the field and go to the next step. One more strong point of this option is for a certain situation, if the user completes the form and go to other step and they have to edit a field in the form in the first place, they just go back and have a quick look at on the subtitle under the category to locate the field that they want to edit. For example, they want to edit the surgeon name or the weight of the person. They can quickly locate that field in the form and click on it to edit it. So actually our team had a chance to present both options to the sponsor last week, and actually they were open to these two options, but for now they want to keep the long form as in the app and don't want to implement the two new option now because they want to show the long form to the user to get the feedback, and if the user have some complaint, they will show them the two prototype and ask them what they think, what they like, and only after that point they would choose what option to go with. So for now, that's it for the prototype.
Yeah, so for like she said, for now, we're sticking with the long form. Like, we're gonna continue working on other parts. But then after we get feedback, so we're planning to have deploy our app to them soon, sometime in March. We're gonna meet this Friday with Chris and the rest of the team and discuss in detail what would be the best time for us to release something to them so that they can actually give it to anesthesiologists and get real feedback on how the UI flow is and how easy it is for them to navigate.
And so the option that they presented to us is that either they can use the Figma prototype that we have already built, or they were waiting on us if we can complete as an MVP the product itself and have the actual product on the mobile phone be presented to the user. So we're discussing with our team internally if we are able to accomplish that. So we were gonna go with them having installed our app on their phone and use that. If we're not able to do that, then we'll just have them use our Figma prototypes.
Yeah. So it just depends on how quick we are at working on this upcoming iteration. And we're gonna explore some things to actually deploy the app out to Arcos as we develop it.
Right.
But we'll come back to that in a second. So now we're gonna do a demo of our app. Where is it? Oh, there it is. So right now, compared to last iteration, we added the patient records and settings buttons. Right now, there's no pages created for them yet, but we just created them to just have the general look of the app laid out. And so we can create a new patient and be able to input all this data, name, weight, sure, none of your business again. And then we have, so as you can see, we have text fields, right? We also have drop downs. And each of these components, we had written it in the code to be reusable, because when we were first working on this, we've been like, okay, go work on the patient name input, and then Donovan, go work on the surgeon name input, right? And so we'd have like people using different like text fonts and different box sizes and stuff. So then we had to step back and realize, okay, we need to create a component for text field that would be the general template, and then have everyone else use that whenever they add a field to the page.
So as for example, if you quickly go over to our code, we created just
Components.
a components directory, and then we put all our reusable components so that anyone that wants to dump this field or dump this slider in any of the position and any of the screen, they just go in and make use of that.
Yeah.
And
so that's having that reusability aspect has helped us work faster.
so that
for
it
sure.
remains consistent all along.
Yeah, and the consistency with the look as well. That's true. And so we have, let's see, how do you scroll on this again?
You tap it. Yeah, tap it.
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's different because on my Android it's different than on iOS. Okay, so we have our text fields and then we have drop-down options in which we can select an option. And click done. So that's text field drop-down. Next we have yes or no option choices. And so if you hit no here, it pops up a text for them to, why is the consent not filled out yet? You know, that's an important part to have filled out. And then another feature we added was the sliders, which this is like we said before, it's to focus on speed whenever they're inputting the data, which is the speed, the whole focus on inputting data fast is more focused on this next page, the status page, which I'll come back to. I'll talk about that in detail in a second. And then finally, we added a, again, talking about doing things fast, we had, for them to select the time, it would just go like that, instead of manually inputting it. And then next, what we worked on in this iteration, the bulk of it was with these two pages, developing them, the status and the monitor page. So in the status page, the user would come in, this is during the surgery now, the surgery started, so every 10 minutes, they would go in and re-input these fields, you know, as it changed. And then at the end, they would submit, which we have not finished fully developing this page yet. There's going to be a submit button at the bottom here for the, and once it hits submit here, the data would be sent, processed, and we would create the graph which displays the changes over time. And they like to have this graph, the anesthesiologist, so that they can quickly look and see, okay, there's a trend going down. After we added a certain drug, we're noticing a trend in the heart rate. And they would know that they added that certain drug because we'd have a component to for them to add notes here. So at 9:40, we gave them this drug. At 9:50, the doctor cut here, here, and here. And that would be able to correspond to the time on the graph, and they'd be able to see any trends that occur there.
Yeah.
And we're also having issues with versioning, which is gonna tie into what Brenda's gonna talk about when we were exploring graph libraries.
Sure. So what I primarily worked on was the monitor page, and like Rami said, we did have some roadblocks. So initially we wanted to use this library called High Charts, but unfortunately we weren't able to use it because it requires Node version of Node 11.2 and up, and we downgraded our version to Node 10 because the Realm part of our application requires Node 8 or 10. So we weren't able to use that library. So after that, we decided to look into more libraries, and at first we worked with React Native ChartKit, but it had its limitations. One of the things that we want our graph to do is to actually be able to scroll, and for React Native ChartKit at the moment, that's not available. So again, we had to look for another library, and this time we came across this library called Victory Native, which was just as customizable as the previous libraries and actually had the scrolling feature that we needed. And so using that, I developed a reusable component for the graph. And right now this data is hard-coded, but ideally what we wanted to do is whenever data is entered in the status page and it's submitted, this will update in real time. Another thing we worked on in the monitor page was the notes part down here. And essentially each of these is a reusable component as well. Like Rami said, we want to keep our UI consistent and just to be able to work faster. And so as of right now, all of this is hard-coded, but one thing that our sponsor mentioned last time they gave us feedback was that they would like us to have a button in the monitor page in which the anesthesiologist can actually enter notes at whatever time they want. And that's something that we will be looking into in our next iteration.
So that's it for our demo. And now we'll be talking about the code refactoring. We kind of already went over it. So the big refactoring part was creating those reusable components of the different text boxes, sliders. Oh, and yeah, we had like a lot of basically trash commented out code and stuff in some of our files. We went back, removed all of that just to make it all nice and clean. Refactoring wise, yeah, it was just those two things really. The reusable components was one of the main things we focused on fixing. And so next, Yuar is going to talk about how we improved our code coverage to 100% and the test cases and how we changed our testing library because there were some issues, and not issues, but limited functionality with the previous testing library using.
Yeah, sure. So before diving deep into it, first I want to show you that we have achieved 100% coverage on all of our files. So 100 all around. Big round of applause. But apart from that, what we did is that we first started out with React Native testing library. And the thing is that testing in the React Native community, the amount of backup from the community is very limited. If you compare it to the web, React Native it's relatively new compared to other frameworks. So there's not a whole lot of libraries that really support testing it out. So we first started out with React Native library, then we switched over to Enzyme, which is essentially geared towards web testing. But it provides different adapters that you can add to make it work. But at the same time, it caused some of the versioning issues within our app. So we had to downgrade the version of Node because of that as well. First, Venkat you had to upgrade the version, but then it upgraded to the very latest version, but then caused the issue with Rome, so it had to downgrade it back to 10. So we did that, switched over to a new testing library that provides even richer API when testing out components.
Yeah.
Especially with the...
And there was like an issue, we were realizing, okay, so it worked on all of our iOS developers Macs, right? And then we're like, okay, maybe it's just the iOS problem, we'll test it on Windows. And then it also worked on Windows too. So then we realized, okay, there's something wrong with the versioning here. We had to go to Venkat, and he, offered us his help. And we just had to have the versions of everything match up, pretty much. Right. So we had to find the middle version of Node that worked for all of our libraries, which it didn't end up being the latest one, unfortunately.
Right. So in our testing, what we're trying to focus is that we are trying to focus that not only do we test that our components render, because it's a little tricky when you're testing UI. Not only do you want to test that it can render, because you can have a 100% code coverage and you can just put fake tests in there. That makes no sense. You can still achieve that. But what we're really trying to do is that we're trying to put focus on the testing in such a way that we are trying to test the functionality of the code itself, that all of the pieces that we place together, they function as they're intended to. And so that we actually get good feedback from the test code, such that if there's ever any change made to the component itself or to the pages itself, then these tests become useful to us in providing good feedback, so that we can go back in and then rework our logic. So whenever you get a chance, you can go in and look at our code. At the same time, we try to be very consistent and clean with our code itself. Try to follow this KISS principle, dry principle, solid principle, and whatnot. So that's that with testing. The next thing is that the CI thing,
which we can just show our history up here.
And not only that,
it loads.
Yeah, not only that, we're trying to focus in terms of, as you can see right now, we already are at like 101 build number, which means we are heavily checking. We're trying to have this methodology where we make small change and commit it, so that if there's any time when we have to reword, we're not rewording like the whole thing. So just make a small functional change, small singular change, and make it as a commit and push it out. That only does one and only one thing.
Yeah, I mean, even if you change like the title, like go back to the emulator real quick. Like even if you change some small text in the UI, like for example, here, which we're gonna need to go back and refactor actually. I don't know why it still says it, but when I take this back, this small change here of, maybe removing this form and the input here, then we would push that. We wouldn't like wait and do other changes as well.
Right.
And the reason this is showing up is because we're doing the thing where we want to have it translatable in both English and Spanish. And so right now we're having not issues, but just we didn't fully write our what was it? We have to create a file which actually has a one-to-one match of the translations, but we're not done with that yet.
Yeah, which is over here. And the thing is that we're not trying to spend time on that because we already have that set up. once we have everything laid out, is when we're gonna go back and then add these constructs where you can go in and add as many languages as so.
Yeah.
So these are just references of, oh, this input is being displayed over there, how should it be displayed if the language is set to Spanish, Arabic, English, and whatnot.
And so we'll come back to this in a later iteration. It's not that much of a focus for us now. So for our, oh no, back there, next iteration page. Yeah. So for our next iteration, we're gonna be, we still have to finish up our monitor page and our status page. Like I said before, the submit button on the status page is not finished. And the reason for that is because we're waiting for work to be done on the realm side of things. Because right now, UR has been working on it, started on it, and it's still a work in progress, figuring that out. And then on the monitor page, we're gonna have to add the functionality for them to come in and add notes at specific times. Like I said before, 9:50, doctor makes a cut here. And then, like I said, UR is gonna be focusing on the realm part of actually storing the data, because if you go to our emulator, whoops, like if I go back now, like these two forms, the 1 and the 3 here, it will not be saved. So we're gonna have to save that.
Not only that, but if let's say you went in, you did something, you accidentally went back, this shouldn't be create new patient, just should be just existing patient or whatever the current session is.
And so that'll be part of what's worked on. Once we have data that's actually stored in memory, we'll be able to go back and change that.
Right.
Okay, and so then we're going to look into the continuous deployment pipeline, so that whenever we're every week or so we have a good release that we can send to Chris at Arcos to have him take a look. And UR was looking at this thing called was it Fastlane?
Yeah.
Because at first the solution was, all right, we're just gonna put an APK of the Android version of our code in a Google Drive and send it to them. But we're thinking of a better solution of being able for them to basically download this app on Fastlane. You download the app off the App Store, and we can push our code to their server on the Fastlane, and it will pull up a virtual version of our app that they can view from their phone.
So the idea is that it removes away all of the manual labor that's required to deploy an app on an Apple Store or on Play Store or App Store. So what this is going to do is that obviously when you're first starting out and you need that beta testing feedback from the users, you don't want to go through always with that motion. The idea is that you set up this continuous deployment pipeline where we set up all that's needed, which most of Fastlane is going to take care of, in such a way that we'll just put our commands in the Jenkins server, and on every release, on every build, on a specific release branch, not on the development branch, on the release branch. As soon as that release branch is done, it's going to run those commands and shoot it off to Fastlane, which is going to shoot it off to 2 apps. One is called Honky app, and the other one is like Test Flight. So the Honky is for testing apps on Play Store, on Android, and Test Flight is going to be used for the iOS. So the idea would be we introduce this as much of a smooth process as possible, not only for the users, for the clients themselves, but also for us, that we don't spend our time continuously doing the labor of deploying apps.
Yeah, and so we're going to discover after meeting a video meeting with them on this Friday, because we weren't able to meet last week, but this week we're going to have a meeting with them. We're going to discuss the deployment part of it, because Chris was excited. He saw our screenshots of what we have done, and he said he wanted to get them in the hands of anesthesia providers ASAP to get feedback on the UI aspect, especially. Mm-hmm. Going back to us talking about the mock-ups here that we made of this version with the tabs at the bottom you select, and the other version where you have these big tabs, and that'll be discussed this Friday when we meet with him.
Yeah, so part of our next iteration will be focusing on the continuous deployment aspect as well. Yeah.
And then we're going to create some UI mockups for the settings page and patient records page. And then after we get feedback from Chris on that, we will actually, even before we get feedback, we'll create a base page for the settings and patient records, so that when you click on it, something actually comes up. And then for our future tasks of overall as a project we're looking at, we're going to need to integrate the periodic notifications to remind the anesthesiologists, hey, it's been 10 minutes, you need to input the data again so we can keep a consistent timeline. And then we're going to need to look into exporting the data out as a PDF. And right now, just on a high level, we haven't dug into it yet. We'll basically just save it as a PDF, and then we'll leave it to the user on their end to take that PDF and use their whatever email app they have on their phone to send it on their side. That's our current idea. We're going to discuss this more with Arcos in the future. And then we're going to need to do more of the realm part, especially for the settings and patient records page. And then finally, we're going to be looking at, in the future, beta testing of actually releasing out our app and having Chris give it to people to get some valuable user experience.
Yeah, that beta testing is just part of our continuous deployment effort. Idea is that in our next iteration, we start exploring that tool that we have just found out and see how we can progress further with it.
That is everything.